Welcome to Tales Tomorrow. I'm Morrow, your storyteller for today, and with me we have some more RPG horror stories. Hey, just want to check in. You been alright? You doing good? If you said yes, good. If you said or no or something along the lines of that, I hope things get better for you, and I hope your day gets better and things get better. Sometimes life can just be kind of a dick. Just gotta deal with it and do your best to make through it. Anyway, let's get to the first RPG horror story for today. Player character's IRL mother tries to self-insert herself into DnD campaign. Hey folks, hope all are doing well today. This story is currently ongoing and was made in hopes of getting suggestions on how to handle this issue while causing the least number of issues possible, as I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place on this one. But without further ado, the story. To start, I, male 23 years old, am a first-time DM, and hopeful forever DM playing 5e in a homebrew world loosely starting or based off the lost minds of Phandelver or Phandelver and below, the Shattered Obelisk. Now for the meat and potatoes. I currently have 3 players for my level 1 game, and for the sake of the story, we'll call these characters Fairy, Wizard's mom, age 56, Wizard, son of Fairy, age 28, and Ranger, my sister, age 13, and Druid, female friend of both Wizard and Fairy, age 34. All of these players have never played before, but love fantasy and science fiction like Lord of the Rings and Critical Role, except for Fairy, who thinks Lord of the Rings is stupid. Okay, that's a red flag already. Kidding, of course. When I think of like big trilogies or big films or any sort of like big media fantasies that have influenced my love for fantasy, I would say definitely was Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings made me love fantasy. Star Wars, the prequel trilogy, mind you, not the original trilogy, the prequel trilogy, was the first Star Wars I've ever watched when I was little, and I absolutely loved it, and it made me love and enjoy sci-fi. The original Star Wars trilogy was also fantastic, but like, I start off with the prequels, baby. I didn't have the OGs. Growing up in Russia, you don't have much media to work with. You only have what's in theaters that's been translated and been dubbed, or nothing at all. Early 2000s Russia was really weird. Anyway, let's continue. I introduced the game to Wizard and Druid at Wizard's house, explaining the rules, the basics of how the classes work and their abilities, with everyone eager to try it out. During this time, I'm pulling up Hero Forge and handing around my iPad so everyone can make minis for themselves that I will later print out for our game, as I plan to play in person with handmade terrain, some of which even have lights built in, and are motorized too. At this time, Wizard's mom invited herself into the group, grabbing the iPad without asking beforehand, making her own character. So to avoid conflict with her self-centered personality, I reluctantly hand her a character sheet and character question sheet, a custom set of 30 questions to help identify more info about everyone's character and establish expectations and hopes for the campaign, to distract her from the iPad long enough for everyone else to make a character. Fairy then quickly fills out the question sheet, haphazardly with the most self-absorbed answers possible, stating how she has the strength to fall mountains, can fly with her giant human-sized fairy wings, and is the prettiest being to ever exist, how she owns a mansion with all those lavish things, and a cherry on top she wanted to be left by her mother on the doorstep of a small cottage home, to which she would run away from at age of 10 because they're too poor for me, and would resent her mother, wherever she was, for leaving her in the dirt-filled place. She also didn't know anything about even the basic rules of the game. Nothing against the story itself. The story is fascinating, but man, reading the writing is kinda rough. I'm gonna still finish it. It's just, I wish there were more punctuations and more like, less run-on sentences, because my lungs could only have so much air. Anyway, it looks like Mama's gonna be the self-absorbed main character Mary Sue kind of character, potentially, because she wants to be rich and powerful and own a mansion, and people are too poor for her style, so how dare they be their foster parents. I'm running away because you're too poor. Thanks for clothing me and feeding me and raising me for 10 years. I'm running off. What a character. Though I'm not pleased with how she's making herself into a main character, or which there really isn't a main character when it comes to D&D, I'm able to help make her more modest and realistic character from the Feywild, with all the details of the backstory. Then comes the time to roll for stats. Each of them get a 3d6 to roll, re-rolling once, doing so 6 times, then assigning them where they please. Druid goes first, rolling well with a 16, 18, 13, 10, 12, and 9. Then Wizard goes, getting not as good a rolls at 9, 11, 12, 14, 16, and 17. Next is Pixie, whose rolls unfortunately very poorly, getting a 6, 9, 12, 12, 10, 15. She then literally starts having a temper tantrum, kicking the table and crying about how unfair it is. To hopefully stop her fit or rage, I allow her to re-roll them if she wants, getting much better numbers, but still not as good as the others too. So she starts talking down to everyone, making everyone else uncomfortable about how she should have been allowed to roll first instead of everyone else. So to avoid this, I take all the rolls, average out everyone's first roll, then second and fourth, until everyone now has the same average stats, which everyone is fine with. Besides Fairy, as she is not better than everyone else. Rolling stats could definitely be a problem, and many of y'all have suggested just doing point buy. And sure, if you want to do point buy, you're more than welcome to. This is my personal system, and it's not going to work for everybody, but here's my system that I currently use. To determine your stats, you typically roll out a roll of stats, so like, first 6 numbers. Now do that 3 times. So now I have 3 rows to choose from. You choose whichever row that you prefer. If all of them suck equally, then we'll go for a 4th. And maybe sometimes a 5th, just to try to get some sort of decent stats, so that players aren't suffering with tons of penalties for those stats. After the players choose the stats, all the lowest rolls can never be below an 8, because god, that'll be rippling to have a -2 in anything. Your highest roll, regardless of what it is, becomes an instant 18, so you can put it in your main stat or like a secondary stat. I know monks use wisdom, and some people would like to put in some rolls into wisdom so they can put it into that. Or if a barbarian wants to put their highest into con for the sake of having more health, perfectly fine as well. Everybody has their own systems of how they prefer to do stats. This is just my way of doing it. It's not going to be perfect. Some of y'all may not agree with it, and it's fine. That's okay. My players are happy with it and have fun with it, and that's what matters to me. If my players are fine with it. If they wanted to do a different system, I'll be okay with that too. But at the moment right now, they're fine with the current system that we're using, so we just go on about it as it is. Let's get back to this story. I then asked them whether they would rather play at the game store, in town, or at my house, which I'm currently working on building a game room in, with lights, sound, and fog machines, as well as a couple of other things, though not ready yet. All but Fairy agreed to do that at my house once the room is ready, but in the meantime do it at the game store. Pixie then demandingly offers what she thinks is a brilliant idea of having the game at her dining room table. I tell her though it is a kind offer with her 5 cats and very hyper large puppy who likes to eat plastic toys, it may not be a good idea with very expensive miniatures and papers. She's not happy about my answer, but huffs and continues to sell me on the idea. To distract her, I start directing her towards Hero Forge again. But right before I'm able to add final touches, poses to design minis and Hero Forge for everyone, Barry then starts telling me about how she can't wait to flay open Blood Eagle, to look it up, everyone from the shopkeepers to children. She read about other people doing it in their games. She also asked me a bunch of other really messed up questions, making Druid uncomfortable, which she texts me. It would likely take long for you to do these things, and she drops the idea, but makes me question what kind of person she is. What is that? What is that? Am I missing major context for this? It told me not to look it up, but I kinda want to. So my question is, how do I let Fairy know in the best and kindest way possible without hurting feelings that it would be better to play somewhere besides her house, just the other 3 players, since I'm a new DM? Thanks in advance, and if you need clarification, I'm glad to give it. Alright, if you want to do this tactfully without getting any feelings hurt, you simply just tell them, oh no guys, something came up and I can't do the game anymore. I'm gonna be busy on weekends and every other day of the game, and I just can't do it. I am so sorry. We'll have to try another time, maybe. Ghost them completely and maybe play with somebody else, or just not play at all at this point, I guess. She seems to be very self-absorbed and very self-centered. Getting through to her is going to be a little difficult. I mean, unless you can convince her and gaslight her to be like, this game is beneath you. This is the poor people game. I mean, I guess you could try that. Convince her that D&D is a poor people game or something. Her character seems to be very like anti-poor or whatever. Poor as dirt and stuff. Maybe it could be that. I don't know. Tell her that it's not cool. It's nerdy. It's crappy. It's not glamorous. Maybe introduce her to a bunch of RPG horror stories. Say, a bunch of people get into really weird bad stuff and it's not fun. We wouldn't like to try it. Gaslight her into not wanting to try D&D. The least tactful method, tell her straight up, I don't think you'd be a good fit. The wizard player, the son of the pixie or fairy or whatever her name is, they might be receiving the brunt end of it. Sure, potentially, maybe, I don't know, there might be a bit of a splash damage going on. That'd be the best way. Just tell straight up, I don't really want you in my game, lady. I'm sorry, but you don't seem like a right fit. I think we wouldn't get along. I reject your reality and substitute my own. I've been meaning to cover this story for a while. I've seen it before, and I've been meaning to go through it and actually properly read it, but never got to. But now we get to, because the title seems really interesting. I'm a longtime TTRPG player and have always been curious about trying to run my own games. Early this year, I decided to try my hand at GMing and created an online Pathfinder 2e game with people from Reddit. This story is about one player in particular that ended up joining my game. After the events that I'll detail later, he ended up stalking my Reddit account and the accounts of the other players from the game. Thought about telling this story for a while, but I think it's finally time. The player I'm writing about will be referred to as that guy. This is going to be a long one, but due to the nature of the story, I think all the details and context are important, as I'm sure he will inevitably reply to this post. So if you don't want to read all the details, I'd say you should go ahead and skip this one. Oh, I'm in for the details, baby, let's do this! Around the time of the WotC OGL debacle, I decided it was a great time to try running my own game. I posted a recruitment thread on r/LFG and asked the potential players to fill out a Google form. I wanted to create a balanced group of different player types, and I intentionally created a mix of personalities so that I could get experience running a game with different types of players. Some were active, some were passive, some preferred combat, and some really enjoyed roleplay. I think this was a mistake in hindsight, and it's better if the actual players have similar personalities out of game and then create characters that might be different within the game. I also set out ahead of time to work with any problem players so that I could get that conflict resolution experience. Little did I know what I was getting myself into. The one important thing when it comes to finding players that mesh well. If the players can get along regardless of the playstyles, as long as they get along well at the table, it should be for the most part fine. Even if somebody that has like a more combat playstyle they prefer, or somebody prefers more RP, if the players are able to get along together at the table, they'll find a middle ground. Shouldn't be that difficult, especially if they vibe really well. I had about 70 players fill out the form, and I was able to get my top 3 applicants. My 4th and 6th place applicants ended up not working out for various reasons, so I ended up picking that guy as the final player. He described himself as a passive player who enjoyed a mix of RP and combat, and a lot of TTRPG experience. I'm not sure if this is how he actually views himself, but it turns out this was the first hint of what dealing with him is like. He doesn't seem to have an accurate perception of reality, whether he's describing himself or events that occurred. I ended up running the beginner box, as it's a simple adventure and all the players were new to PF2E. Try to work with everyone on their characters, and it seemed like everyone had a pretty clear idea of what they wanted to play. I'd previously been in games as a player where another player regretted making his character and wanted to change, but the GM wouldn't let him. So I wanted to make sure all the players were able to try out different things during the beginner box if they wanted. That guy first wanted to make a swashbuckler, which is a roguish tank class that has a variation of sneak attack. He ended up changing his mind and created a magus to play during the first session. The magus is a pure DPS class that is a hybrid spellcaster and martial arts. After the first session, he ended up not liking the magus and wanted to play a flurry ranger the next session. The flurry ranger is another tanky DPS class that is almost the exact opposite of the magus. The magus generally had one strong attack per turn, and the flurry ranger will have many small attacks. This list of characters will be relevant later. I gotta say, the variety of classes that you have in Pathfinder sounds so fascinating. It's probably one of the reasons I want to try Pathfinder really badly. But let's continue. During the second session, he ended up not liking the ranger either. There's a part of the beginner box where we level up mid-session, so the player can learn how to do it. At the time, he asked if he could make another character, a Redeemer Champion, which is a pure tank class. He assured me that he already had it ready and could be done by the time the other players level up. Told him he could go ahead as long as he did it quickly. He ended up taking a great deal more time than anticipated, and I think it was a bad decision to let him swap mid-session. Either way, they end up finishing the beginner box, but his character ends up going down in the final fight. I was using a house rule that they could not actually die in the beginner box, as it was more of a tutorial, so this character survived. We decided to move into a full campaign as a group since everyone apparently enjoyed the beginner box. That guy decided to create yet another character for the campaign, and after all his experience he decided to create an inventor. The inventor is another pure DPS class that has access to some flavorful abilities and gadgets, although they're a little low in the power level compared to some options. At this point, I tried to be clear that the AP was going to be pretty combat heavy and that most RP would happen between party members. No one had any issues. I don't know if I'll put this in the video, but I literally just now got a cramp in one of my toes, dude. The toe next to the big toe. Oh, that felt weird. I never had a cramp in my toe before. Outside of the game, that guy made some posts in Discord complaining about another PF2E game that he is in. He ends up posting a copy of a very long chat log between him and the GM of this other game. And informs us that he left all the games he was in except for mine. It was pretty bizarre and a big red flag, but I decided to roll with it at the time. If what he said is true, which is pretty unlikely given my subsequent interactions with him, it sounded like he was bullied pretty heavily in the other game he was in. The other players apparently figured out how to indirectly PvP his character by throwing explosive and flammable items towards him, which were ignited by his character's flaming sword. It seemed like the GM allowed this to happen. Honestly felt bad for him and wanted to try extra hard to make our game work for him. I mean, it could have been bullied in the other games. That could be a possibility for sure. Problem players don't just become problem players for the sake of being a problem player. Maybe there's something else going on. Problem players, especially the ones that like to lie a lot, would like to make themselves look like the good guy in a story rather than the bad guy. Maybe there's a reason why things explode a lot. Maybe he was running around all over a mine full of explosives with a flaming sword out. When the DM said, you have your flaming sword out next to explosives, there's a chance you could light them or something. I don't know. There could be a possibility for any of it. Problem players will sometimes make up lies, convenient lies, to make themselves look good. The campaign started, and that guy apparently enjoyed his inventor enough to get some art commission for it. I did not ask or encourage him to do this, and he is the only player who did so. A few sessions went by and everything seemed to be going really well. The group worked together and survived the early levels of difficult AP with no deaths. This is actually pretty good for this particular AP. That guy goes down in 2 separate fights, but is immediately healed. I also did warn them all ahead of time about the difficulty of the system and this AP. I don't know what AP means. Adventure Prologue? Adventure Pathfinder? Oh, wait, hold on. Is that a new name for a module? Adventure Play? Automated Play? I don't know. I don't know the name of the acronym. It either means a chapter in the story or it means a module. That's the only 2 things I'm getting from the context. Adventure Path. I'm looking on Google right now. Adventure Path is a long-lasting adventure lasting from a very long time character-wise. Cool. Alright, Adventure Path. The real issue started after a particular brutal session where his character almost died. He basically charged in, missed his attack, got knocked out, and then healed by another player. He stood up, picked up his weapon, attacked and missed again. The enemy had the potential to kill him outright, but ended up rolling low on his attack and damage, and that guy does not go down again. It was a pretty miserable fight from his perspective, but that's how it goes sometimes. It was a difficult fight, but they end up coming out on top. This was the first session the guy's character art was ready, and he played the session with his new art and token. Things were tense after the fight. Since his character nearly died, I tried to break the tension by joking that the new art gave his character plot armor. A few jokes were exchanged by me and the other players, and we prepared to move on. That guy, who had been fairly quiet, then started ranting loudly into his mic. I don't want to cause a scene, but something's not right here. I shouldn't be going down multiple times a fight, every fight. No one else is doing any damage except me, and everyone's wasting their turns using athletics or amped shield instead of attacking. The summoner is just trying to trip 8 times a turn, and the wizard is wasting those spells on dumb stuff instead of just doing damage. He continued for a bit, and it evolved into just openly flaming the other players. I did my best to calm him down, and the other players tried to defend themselves, but they were obviously uncomfortable. I told them that it's a hard system, and they're actually doing really well in some tough fights. I eventually calmed him down enough to move on, and offered to talk to him more after the session to see if he could resolve things. Man, that guy sounds very bitter. He thinks he's doing the most damage, and he is the only one doing damage. Everybody else is wasting their turn. Well, that's gonna be an interesting conversation to have one-on-one. He's pretty quiet for the rest of the session. He drops some passive-aggressive remarks a few times, but ends up getting the killing blow on another tough enemy. I asked him if he wanted to describe how he kills it, and he says, no, not really. The session ended, and I talked to him afterwards to try and figure out how to move forward if we can. He continues to flame the other players privately and states they make it impossible for him to have fun. This becomes a trend later. He again brings up how he goes down every fight multiple times a fight. This is just not true. Since he was angry, I don't press the point too much, but I keep it in mind for later. He does bring up some legitimate points about the party composition. I eventually decided to let him create yet another character, this time a dual-wielding orc fighter. It's a super tanky character that can deal a ton of damage and is borderline broken, but I believe it will solve the issues he's having. This will be his 6th character. At some point you gotta tell the guy, listen, this is your 6th character, you gotta stop. I hope you stop him and tell him like, oh, this is your last change of character. Afterwards, if there's another problem, clearly it's not the character, it's you. I did suggest that he plays fighter as I thought it was a good solution for his particular issue. He would later make the claim that I forced him to play a tank, but this is not true. Early in this post, I went into detail about the other characters he played who were not tanks as evidence of this. In fact, at this point in the campaign, the only other character he brought up was a Dampier monk, which is also a tank. I suggested fighter and asked him to read the double slice feed, and he gave him the number breakdown of how much damage he would be doing. He had said no at this point, that would have been perfectly fine. Due to my experience with him so far, I believe he will be happier playing a character that was super strong, so you could feel like the hero of the game, since he seemed like the type of player. If somebody is being a main protagonist character, you don't feed the main protagonist. Don't feed the main protagonist with anything. Don't let people be main protagonists because it's gonna go up to the head. This guy already has a very low expectation or very low thought or feeling about how his other players are doing. I think it's just gonna feed the guy's ego that he clearly has. He thinks he's like the greatest all around and everybody is useless and wasting their turn and everything. When I told the other players that I was letting him change character again, I got a lot of negative feedback. They basically said they didn't want to make changes for him and that all the character switching was impacting the other players. One player said I need to be firm with him and set clear expectations for the type of game that we're in. I convinced them to let him try one last time, as I really did believe the character would solve things. Yeah, no, the other player was completely right. You really should have put the foot down and told him no changes, because if you just let the guy change every single time he complains about stuff, it's just never going to be ending. You're going to have to deal with a player that is playing the new flavor of the month, or I guess flavor of the day, every single day, every new session, and that sounds abysmal. That sounds so abysmal. Imagine balancing for somebody that could just re-roll to whatever character they want anytime they want. We went through the next session, and it was just a highlight reel for his new character. His AC is high, he had a ton of health, and ancestral ability to avoid getting knocked down. He does a ton of damage and even kills a few enemies in one hit. Every complaint he previously had was solved by this new character. On the RP side, he decided to go for a more goofy personality for his fighter. He ends up knocking on every door in a dungeon before entering, going, "Hello, everyone in there?" He goes for a few slapstick goofs and generally just sprints through the dungeon, breaking and killing things. It was at odds with the way the other players wanted to play the game. One of the other players asked him to not sprint so loudly through the dungeon. They encountered a trap room with some tripwire, and he threw the corpse of an enemy at the wires to trigger them. There was an enemy in a nearby room who heard this and ended up casting a buff spell on himself in preparation for combat. That guy's character says, "We can hear you in there. We're about to come in and kill you. Buckle up." I'm paraphrasing here. One of the other players had enough and tells him to stop. I believe his exact words were simply, "Stop that." That guy takes offense and plays the rest of the session, which was just combat, in his quiet, passive-aggressive way. This was unfortunate, but I thought he would be happy since the combat went so well. After the session, I asked for his thoughts on his character, and he replies, "It's boring." After all I went through to convince the other players, I was pretty annoyed, so I didn't talk to him for a few days. Nothing will make the guy happy, because he's gonna find another way to complain and blame it on the party and stuff. I mean, at least he's not flaming the party, so I guess that's an improvement, but still, it doesn't solve the full issue here. A few days later, he mentions in the Discord that he wants to play an Oracle since it's super flavorful class, and it will enable him to RP more. I talked to him in DMs, and he now has a completely new, diametrically opposed list of complaints that are just as important as all the things we just solved. He claims that he cannot RP in-game as the other players won't let him, and his character is too boring. He needs to play a flavorful spellcaster in order to move forward. He also continues to flame other players in DMs since he claims there are no RP power gamers who don't know how to build or play their characters. I really hope the DM told him no, because guess what? You can change how your character is to make him less boring. Just because you're playing as a fighter that was obnoxious and ran through and was goofy and stuff, doesn't mean you can't add him more interesting characteristics. But this, ladies and gentlemen, is a horror story, so we can have a possibly beneficial outcome here. Let's see how the DM handles this situation. I finally put my foot down and told him that I won't let him make any more characters. I can work with him to make his character more flavorful and interesting, but I refuse to ask the other players to change since I don't think they did anything wrong. He continues to say that the other players won't let him RP. I tell him that I can change up things in next session so that I can RP more with him if the other players won't. He continues to flame the other players for not RPing or talking enough. I end up telling him that 2 of the players mentioned on their application that they prefer combat, but that I try to create a balanced group with him and other player that both prefer RP. So the final group was 2 combat players and 2 RP players. The other RP player, who wasn't that guy, was a phenomenal role player and talked a ton, and I thought overall it was a pretty good balance. However, that guy took this information and then claimed that I lied to him about the RP combat balance of the game and had intentionally created a wargaming table with people who couldn't RP or play combat correctly. Did he just miss what the DM just said completely? This obviously wasn't true, but after talking to him for several hours late into the night, I realized that there was nothing I could do to make him happy. I ended up bringing up his earlier claims that he went down every fight, multiple times a fight. I believed it was a bit delusional about the event that occurred, so I wanted to use this as an example of how he could be misremembering things. I offered to send him the combat logs from Foundry, which I had never deleted, and do a Control F4, that guy had gone unconscious. I forget the exact message. There were only 3 entries since we started the campaign, and never more than once in one fight. Considering I had resolved every one of his many complaints only to be met with another list of complaints the following week that were just as important to him but had nothing to do with the original list, I realized we just had irreconcilable differences and could not continue playing together. Thought to be polite, but I was firm and ended up removing him from the game and the Discord. He told me that he had another game lined up, he was planning on quitting anyway. He told me I was a crap GM and he was only staying in the game to watch it crash and burn. He then went full mask off and demanded I pay him back for the money he spent on his character art. He'd said something like, "You might think I'm freaking around or just mad that you kicked me, but I'm dead serious. You owe me money." It was at this point that I blocked him and tried to cut contact. My man, you spend your own money to commission art for your character. Nobody else did that for you. Nobody else forced you or convinced you to do that. Nobody owes your money. What an inconsiderate prick. Literally, what a dickhead. It's funny that I can say dickhead on YouTube just fine, but if I use anything else, like call him like a poo-poo head, or like different word, I have to censor it. It's weird. YouTube making YouTube videos is weird nowadays. Anyway, let's continue. I told the other players that I felt like I had no choice, and I honestly would have rather quit the campaign entirely instead of continuing with that guy. Told them that if they disagreed, they were free to leave the game, but if they wanted to continue, then we could. They all ended up staying. I found a replacement player for that guy and we continued on for a while. I ended up having to quit the campaign sometime later due to IRL obligations. That guy ended up making his own post in the subreddit soon after, but one of the players found the post and called him out for lying. That guy then deleted the post. It didn't seem like he was all there mentally during the campaign, but since kicking him, he's been completely unhinged. He created a new account and had been stalking my Reddit account along with other players' accounts. He replied to our post with bizarre rants that are about 1% true. It's alarming. He commented on a post I made applying to another game calling me a PDF file. That's another word I heard about lately that people have been used for like censoring the that word. A PDF file, like the PDF folders and files that you open up on your computer. Kind of interesting, clever, and claiming I tried to snuggle NPCs. I'm not sure how the last part even makes sense. He changed his username to be "my username is a PDF file" when new GM brought it up to me and seems understandably concerned. I decided to finally make this post to get the whole situation out on paper. I'm probably going to make new accounts after this to avoid any future interactions with that guy. That guy, since I'm sure you'll read this, I genuinely ask you to seek professional help. You must know on some level the things you're saying or remembering aren't true. I don't think you're a bad guy and I don't have any hard feelings towards you. I wanted to get this out and then I'm moving on. Hope you can do the same. Good luck, man. Look at this guy! Look at this DM! Taking the high ground for this whole situation. I feel like this guy in the story particularly, is kind of just gonna ruin it for himself. Because the way that he's acting, he's always gonna be kicked out of games. He keeps talking about like how he was kicked out of games before, and this is the only game that he was writing on. And as soon as the DM brought up the problem with him, he's like, "Fine, kick me out anyway. I don't care. I've got another game lined up anyway. You crap DM anyway. I just like to watch the game crash and burn." It's one thing not be happy with your initial player choice and stuff, but it's another thing where you constantly berate others and think that you're better than everyone and that you should be given special privilege to change up your class for whatever reasons, this, that, or other, instead of just being a regular polite player that wants to play D&D with everybody else, or I guess Pathfinder with everybody else. For real, if the guy even had some semblance of self-reflection, he'd be able to realize, I am the problem all along. If only I wasn't the problem, I could have fun. And with that, that's gonna be all our stories for today. I want to thank you very much for watching, and thanks so much for being here. If you like what I do, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. Also, if the RPG Horror Stories ever goes down, or if you want to submit your own personalized horror story, email is down in the description below. I'll see you again in more Tales Tomorrow. Bye-bye.